Hi everybody, I'm Alistair Ben and you're watching Expressive Photography. In today's video I want to address the subject, which is, does gear really matter? Now, of course, anyone who watches the Expressive Photography channel knows that my focus tends to be more on what is behind the camera, the person behind the camera, rather than the gear itself. However, I found myself recently having to use not my regular camera, which is the Fujifilm G.A.S 100 Mark II with a 45-100mm lens on it. So I found myself not using that basically because I've had a herniated disc and have been suffering quite badly from sciatica. So in the recent workshop that I was running on the north coast of Spain with my dear buddy Adam Gibbs, I found myself using the camera that's videoing me right now, which is the Fujifilm X-S20. Now, that superficially I felt was going to be something of a handicap, and I wasn't going to be able to make photos in my usual way. And in addition to dropping the weight of the camera itself, I also took my vlogging tripod rather than my G.A.S and my Arca Swiss cube head, thus saving kilos and kilos more. Just on the technical point of view there, the Fujifilm GFX 100 Mark II with the 4500 on it weighs about 5 pounds or 2.3 kilos for the metric people among you, and the little XS20 with an 18 to 55mm lens comes in at just under 2 pounds or 894 grams. Now, that saving of weight really helped me to get around a bit more, and in addition to using the tripod, I was still able to get down to the beach and make some photographs. So, what was the big deal? Was I handicapped? Was I not able to make photographs the way I normally would? And the answer is, of course, no. It has to be said that good equipment is of great value. It is wonderful to use. I have 4 electric guitars and I love them all dearly. Do they make me a better guitar player than using a much cheaper guitar? That's questionable. However, you do get that feel-good factor using good equipment. I saw Adam recently posted a video about the new Hasselblad that he's been using, and of course that's a very expensive niche camera. However, he gets a real buzz out of using it. Where I was pleasantly surprised with the XS20 was just how similar it was in terms of its functionality to the normal GFX 102 or the 100S that I used for most of last year. I found shooting with this little camera to be incredibly exciting. It's so dynamic, very useful little camera, and having the limitation of only one lens just basically meant I had to find scenes that worked with what I had available. If you're going to use a camera for sports or wildlife or bird photography, and you need speed, you need long focal lengths, you need multiple frame rates, you need predictive focus, all of those types of features, then of course that comes at a price, and you need to use equipment that is suitable for your needs. But what I thought I'd do is just come in and have a look at my Lightroom catalogue here at some of the photographs that I made while I was on the north coast there, and talk you through why I liked them and what it was about the camera system that I found most appealing. The only other piece of equipment I did carry with me were my Case Revolution filters. Most of the photographs I took when you're running a seascape workshop where you're manipulating time, or managing reflections of water, a polarizer and a set of ND filters is always going to be very handy. And no surprises to know I'm a big fan of the Case filters. So I've just pulled out a few images here. I only took about 120 photos in the 10 days that we were away, so I was not shooting an awful lot. The biggest limitation wasn't the camera, it was the tripod. I found it flimsy and I couldn't really get it where I wanted to a lot of the time, but I got by. Had it been windier, we would have really struggled with that tripod. However, it was quite calm most of the time. So if we go back to this question about the person behind the camera, That is obviously going to be far more important than the equipment we use. I've been photographing for over 20 odd years now, professionally for over a decade, and I'd like to think that I can go anywhere, even with an iPhone, and I'm going to find something that catches my eye, and I'm going to be able to eliminate everything that's not what I want to have included in the frame. You may have seen other photographs from this location, maybe in Adam's videos or in social media, but I'm going to just show you the things that appeal to me and caught my eye. Now, obviously the X-S20 only has, 26 megapixels as opposed to the 102 megapixels of the 100 Mark II. So the biggest difference we see is that when we start to zoom in, we don't get that huge amount of detail that I would be expecting with the bigger camera. However, the files are amazing. The dynamic range is excellent, the detail is excellent, the sharpness has been excellent, and generally for posting 99% of what I do with photographs, this camera would be adequate. I'm not going to lie. The only aspect ratio that wasn't available to me in shooting was the 65x24 X-Pan, which is something I do enjoy shooting with the bigger camera. However, I think that is available in some of the other Fuji cameras. So for me, composition is about simplicity, it's about flow, it's about angles and dynamics. And this beach we were at had quite a busy foreground. The tide was going out, there was lots of rocks in the foreground, and I just thought, get rid of them. I just want to eliminate everything. And while I do have some other compositions with foregrounds, this to me summed up the beauty of the place. I shot quite a lot of long exposures, a couple of minutes here, and was actually stacking a 10-stop and a 3-stop ND filter, as you can see in this little bit of film here. When we have water piling in, managing time is so important, and even a 60-second exposure, I was still noticing quite a lot of texture. So I bumped it up to 2 minutes, and that really stripped it down and allowed me to really simplify this scene. I look on seascape photography as an opportunity to manage time, which therefore manages the look and feel of the photographs. So that skill, that technique, that gear-related change, whether it's understanding how to get a long exposure out of your camera or indeed using the right filters to get the length of time you want, they are technical things that are fundamentals to our craft. However, in this particular case, I'm sure the image turned out more or less exactly the same as it would have done had I been using the bigger camera, apart from the fact that, of course, there are less megapixels. This was at the limit of my focal range, zooming in, and you can see this area down in here in the first shot, and zoomed in a bit tighter, brightened it up. And this is another scenario where this is quite a dark, foreboding image, quite gloomy, just allowing that blue to warm color combination there. But in this one, brightening everything up and making it just a little bit more cheery and energetic. Again, managing the shutter speed to try and reduce texture was important. This is a photo I really liked. I was stood talking to one of the participants, and I was just talking about things that I was noticing, and the thing I really caught was these shadows here. This is the raw file, so I haven't removed footprints and stuff like that, but I loved the relationship between the rocks here and the shadows. The shadows become the subject, and I think that's a really nice way of looking at the world. So the bottom line is really that I was limited to the composition because of the focal length. Had I had a longer lens, I may well have focused just on the shadows, but I was limited, so I took a wider shot. In terms of details, this is what excites me about being a landscape photographer, is going into a beach which has been washed clean by the rising and falling of the tide, and you have a clean canvas every single time you go out. I've been to these beaches dozens and dozens of times over the years, and they're different every single time. We can't predict, we can't assume that things are going to be the way we would want them to be or have experienced in the past. And I love that about landscape photography, is that freshness, particularly by the ocean. simple shots, just pointing the camera at things that I thought were cool. And this is an image that I think is a little quirky by leaving these open sections at the top there, but I like the way the channel kind of disappears into the top of the frame. This second scene I think is a bit more concise, and really this is just where we were stood, and I pointed my camera at an arrangement that I thought was cool, and that is the fundamental basis of all my photography. It's not very sophisticated, I'm afraid. I don't think very much when I point my camera at things. It's just, I like that, I'm going to make a photograph of it. Now, one of the things I really did like about using the X-S20 is because it is a cropped sensor. It's this APS-C sensor, and what that means is that I have greater depth of field. One of the downsides, call it that if you want, of the medium format system there is less depth of field at a comparable aperture than you would get at 35mm. And as we go down to the APS-C sensor, we get more depth of field at a similar focal length and aperture. So what that meant was I was able to handhold an awful lot of rock details and abstracts that I would normally have had to use a smaller aperture or use the tripod for. Pretty much all of these are handheld. And this one in particular, now this is the full frame, and I thought it might be worthwhile taking a look there. So if we zoom in, we can see we've got nice sharp rocks in the foreground, then the sweep, and then the back wall there, and more or less all of that is sharp. And this was taken at f11, and that's handheld a 15th of a second, so that's the in-body camera stabilization at 39mm, which I guess is times 1.5. Will give you the 35mm equivalent. Now, if I wanted to distill this composition down into what I would consider to be its essence, I would be looking to crop this, I think, and I may be inclined to go square here, and stripping it down to about there. So now I feel the content sits in the frame, I've got this great depth, I've got everything sharp, and I've eliminated some of the distractions. I've talked so many times over the years now on the channel about luminosity, contrast, and distractions. Luminosity is always the distraction if it's tucked in at the side of the frames here. So the craft of composition, the craft of seeing and composing is the skill worth learning. That is where we want to be investing the majority of our energy. Because the camera, we end up having to work with the tool that we have, and in this particular case, the X-S20 was easier for me to work with than the GFX100 II would have been. Bigger sensor, less depth of field. This might have been a scene that I would have had to focus stacked. I would certainly have had to use a smaller aperture to try and increase that depth of field, and the processing would take a lot longer because I would have probably had to focus stack and combine those multiple frames. So using a lightweight system allows us to be very spontaneous, to do things freely and with less technique. If we talk about this debate, and let me just skim through here, there's a couple more shots. So these are just a couple more detailed shots. I was really loving the way the rocks were shining and the color contrasts. And again, this is a handheld shot, and the depth of field is excellent. And finally, the way the light was just catching these moody striations and shapes in the rocks there. So when it comes to the big question, does gear really matter? Of course it does. If you want to do specific things, particularly wildlife that I've mentioned earlier, you need the proper equipment. If you just want to go out and photograph in the landscape and go for a long hike and relax and to be free and not be carrying tons and tons of heavy gear around, then of course using a lighter system with a smaller sensor, lightweight tripod, all of those types of things buy you that freedom. So will I be giving up my GFX100 II? No, of course, I still love using it, and it does feel like an incredible piece of equipment. I love using it. It feels so solid. And in windy weather, on top of my Gitso with the Arca Swiss Cube, it's bomb-proof and I can make images in very, very severe weather conditions. It's also slightly better weather sealed, but at the end of the day, the little X-S20 was no barrier to me enjoying myself, engaging with the world, and making some photographs that I really like. I do look forward to getting up to Iceland next month and hopefully getting the GFX 102 working up there. It's going to be nice to get back up to the south coast of Iceland. I haven't been there for quite a few years actually, but the passion that I have for engaging with nature and pointing my camera at things I think are cool isn't really influenced by the gear that I have in my hand. And I hope here at Expressive Photography you get that encouragement to realize that the gear you have isn't necessarily the biggest barrier to you expressing yourself and to explore the world in creative ways. I hope that here on the channel and of course the Expressive Photography Forum, we provide some content for you that's going to allow you to step out of that box of judgment where you think, oh well, if I don't have the latest and greatest camera, I'm never going to get anything out of this. Don't forget, the 26 megapixels I've just had in the north coast of Spain was more megapixels than I had in 2007 when I was shooting a 1DS Mark II, which was the flagship $10,000 camera of Canon at the time. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you enjoy the content. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and leave a comment underneath. That's always helpful for that horrible algorithm that we're always battling against. Thanks for watching. I look forward to bringing you some more content again very, very soon. Bye for now.